Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a palace. But not just any palace. You're in the heart of a medieval kingdom now. Thick stone walls rising around you, velvet tapestries muting the cold drafts, and the quiet click of embroidered slippers echoing down a candlelit corridor. Somewhere nearby, a queen sits on a cushioned throne, draped in gold-threaded fabric that weighs more than her crown. She smells faintly of rosewater and something older, dustier, something almost like secrecy. You think you're safe, wrapped in your blanket, but here's your reality check. You probably wouldn't survive this world. Not as a peasant, not even as a noble, and certainly not as a woman with opinions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the velvet cage, a place both luxurious and suffocating. Being a medieval queen isn't quite the fairy tale you imagined. Sure, you've got jewels the size of quail eggs, and gowns that took 5 villages to stitch together. But the truth? You're a political pawn with a golden leash. You're married off by age 14, maybe 16 if you're lucky. Your husband is usually a king, older, louder, surrounded by men who mutter about alliances and dowries as if your body were a chest of silver. And your role? To smile, to bear heirs, and to never, ever show how smart you really are. The court is a minefield, and you're walking it in soft shoes. Every eye is on you. Servants listening behind doors, ladies in waiting with mouths that move faster than your heartbeat. And that crown? It's not just heavy. It's threaded with expectations, sharp with hidden thorns. One mainstream fact: Eleanor of Aquitaine, yes, the real queen who was both Queen of France and then Queen of England, spent 15 years locked away by her second husband, King Henry II, all while wearing that invisible corset of queenly duty. And don't even get started on wardrobe politics. Every brocade you wear sends a message. Pearls mean purity. Emeralds whisper fertility. A slight change in sleeve width, and suddenly rumors swirl that you're aligning with your husband's enemies. You once wore a shade of blue too similar to a rival duchess's family colors and nearly sparked a diplomatic incident over fashion. That's power and paranoia stitched together. The fringe tidbit? Some queens, like Isabella of France, known delightfully as the she-wolf of France, allegedly wore male armor under her gowns, not just as protection but as defiance. One chronicler swore she had daggers sewn into her corset. Whether true or not, the myth stuck. A walking contradiction, delicate and deadly. You don't get to be fully woman, nor fully monarch. You're a symbol like stained glass, beautiful to look at but never meant to be touched. And if it cracks, if you're too clever, too opinionated, too barren, too anything, you get quietly rewritten. Historians still argue whether queens like Margaret of Anjou were political masterminds or just scapegoats in a world run by fearful men. Your days are filled with ceremonies. Morning prayers where every syllable is judged for grace. Meals where the wrong glance across the table can trigger gossip lasting a generation. Your nights? Carefully staged. You're escorted into the king's chamber by noble witnesses to ensure the union is, shall we say, productive. Romantic, right? Even childbirth is a spectacle. You lie on your back in agony, surrounded by midwives and noblewomen, everyone waiting. Not to support you, but to verify if the child is male. If not, there's polite silence, and maybe some whispered blame. And yet, within that velvet cage, you learn the shadows. You figure out how to bend power. You learn which smile disarms, which silence unnerves. You remember names, alliances, bloodlines, and secrets. You build a network from behind your embroidery hoop, your needle a pen, your silk thread the ink. You begin to notice things. A servant limping from the kitchen. A knight avoiding your eyes. A letter not quite sealed. You understand how to hold court not with decrees, but with dinner invites. You test influence not in open battle, but by who's excluded from your afternoon walks. And while kings are at war or in bed with their mistresses, queens are building something far more dangerous. Quiet legacies. Here's a joke that's not quite a joke. A medieval queen had 3 duties: be fertile, be faithful, and be forgotten. But the best queens, oh, the best ones, broke all 3 rules and still made it into the history books. Sometimes with a halo, sometimes with horns. So you sit now in that velvet-draped chamber, learning to breathe through the layers of silk and unspoken rules. You sip spiced wine and listen more than you speak. You learn the difference between loyalty and leverage. And you wait, because queens know that time, used well, is sharper than any blade. Welcome to the cage. It's beautiful, it's brutal, and you've only just stepped inside. You wake up before dawn, not out of duty, but because queens rarely sleep deeply. There's always something. A creaking corridor, a hushed voice, the lingering echo of a dream where you were free. But instead, you lie here, your body curled beneath sheets that cost more than a village roof, watching shadows slide across painted ceilings. And you pray, not just because you're devout, though that's expected, but because praying is one of the few things you can still control. You kneel in your private chapel, incense curling upward like questions, and whisper Latin verses with trembling lips. But don't be fooled, this isn't just religion. It's also strategy. Your confessor is more than a man of God. He's your vault, your therapist, and your liability all rolled into one. What you reveal and how you reveal it shapes the narrative that reaches your king and, more dangerously, your enemies. Confession in the medieval court is like passing a note in class, one that might be read aloud by the wrong person. You confess you've felt lonely. You confess you've harbored unqueenly thoughts. You don't mention the dreams about slipping through the gate at dawn and never coming back. That one you keep. Some queens wrote confessions as poetry, and of Bohemia allegedly kept a book of hours, filled with cryptic notes and verses about isolation and betrayal. Historians still debate whether they were meditations or veiled warnings. One fringe theory, that she used religious texts as ciphers, hiding letters between lines of psalms. In the great cathedrals, queens kneel with eyes lowered, faces angelic, and hearts full of calculation. You know this truth. The holier you appear, the more sin you can quietly survive. After all, if you walk like a saint, who would suspect the dagger in your sleeve? But it's not always about knives. Sometimes it's about words. You hear them swirling around you in court like gnats on summer fruit. Those soft-laced accusations. Too fond of her chamberlain? Speaks too freely with the bishop? Was seen smiling at the ambassador? You learn quickly that in this world, purity is currency. And suspicion? That's the interest rate. You might cry in your chamber, but never in public. That's a luxury only the powerless can afford. Instead, you master the expression queens must perfect. The slightly amused, vaguely tragic half-smile. As if to say, yes, I'm aware of the rumors, but I've already forgiven you for them. Sometimes the confessions are real. You did right to that night. You did linger too long in the cloisters with that lady who smelled like apple blossoms and read forbidden poetry. But real or not, the sin isn't the act. It's being caught. And then there are the priests. Oh, the priests. Some genuinely want to save your soul. Others want something else entirely: proximity, power, influence. One memorable story? Queen Joan I of Navarre once confessed to a monk who later claimed she asked for a love potion. Historians still argue whether he fabricated it or if she truly feared losing her king's affection. Either way, the tale stuck, and she spent her final years defending her name. There's also the matter of relics. You collect them like charms, bones of saints, fragments of veils, nails said to have touched the true cross. Every queen has her favorites, but privately, you wonder how many of these holy objects were carved by some enterprising peasant with access to a chicken bone and a file. Still, you wear the relics. You display the crosses. You finance chapels. Because it's expected, yes, but also because piety makes a perfect disguise. Queens who kneel often enough are less likely to be accused of adultery, or treason, or witchcraft. Well, at least until someone finds a letter tucked beneath your mattress. Joke time. What's the difference between a praying queen and a plotting queen? Just which direction her eyes are facing. At feasts, the priest blesses the wine before you drink it, but you pretend not to notice the way he eyes your necklace, the one set with sapphires the size of gooseberries. You pretend not to see the bishop whisper to your steward. You just smile, fold your hands, and listen for which names are missing from grace. Behind the prayer, behind the pageantry, behind the eternal expectation of virtue, there's a quiet rebellion. You begin to write letters of your own, not to confess but to connect. A cousin in another court, a childhood friend now married to a rival noble. Carefully worded messages wrapped in metaphor and Latin flourishes. Your pen becomes your second tongue. Even if your mouth speaks vows and virtue, your letters hint at strategy. They say, I see what's coming. They say, we may need each other. They say, I am not just this crown. And of course, you sign them as expected, with devotion and humility in Christ. But in the margins, a single pressed flower, particular ink, a date that only one person will understand. That's how queens confess, not with tears, but with codes. The confessor still comes each Thursday. You say the right things. You speak of envy, of pride, of how you once doubted God's plan. He listens. He absolves. You bow your head. And when he leaves, you return to your desk and pick up your quill. Because queens can kneel and plot at the same time. You sit at your writing desk, draped in layers of linen and velvet, a single candle flickering beside you. The wax pools like spilled secrets on polished oak as your quill dances carefully across parchment. You're not writing scripture, not tonight. You're composing something far more dangerous. A letter. It begins innocently enough. To my most loyal and trusted. But between each word, the air crackles with tension. Because you aren't writing to your king, or your cousin, or even your steward. You're writing to him. The knight. The one who bowed too deeply, who met your eyes a moment too long, who smelled like pine and always left the room too early. That one. You pause. The line between bravery and recklessness has never been thinner. Across medieval Europe, letters like these have toppled dynasties. Love, especially forbidden love, has always been the queen's most dangerous weapon. And yet, here you are, sharpening it. You think you're being careful. You write in Latin. You quote scripture. You write in metaphors, like a schoolgirl hiding under a veil of poetry. But history knows better. These letters never truly vanish. They hide in attics, in abbey basements, and centuries later, they resurface like ghosts. Take Queen Margaret Tudor, yes, Henry VIII's sister, who carried on a correspondence with Lord Methven even while still married. Those letters, drenched in longing and political maneuvering, were eventually intercepted. They became Exhibit A in a scandal that would rattle both the Scottish court and the church. And yet, letters persisted, because silence was worse. You don't write daily. That would be too obvious. You space them out, time to festivals, feast days, times when attention is diverted. You give them to trusted messengers, or tuck them into prayer books and pass them to your lady-in-waiting, who is either your greatest ally or your future downfall. Hard to tell. Sometimes you don't write about love at all. Sometimes it's politics wrapped in passion. I long for the day we stand together in truth, you might say, which sounds romantic, but to the right person means we have the church on our side now. Strike soon. Historians still argue whether Eleanor of Provence's letters to a certain foreign diplomat were diplomatic overtures or signs of a secret affair. The surviving fragments are maddeningly vague, full of phrases like, "The moon watches us both," and "Your silence burns hotter than the hearth." Flirtation or strategy, or both. Quirky tidbit for you. In some courts, queens had wax tablets with messages that vanished after reading. Early espionage, medieval style. One French queen allegedly sent a love note carved into a fruit that was eaten by a servant to destroy the evidence. Romantic and biodegradable. Back in your room, your hand shakes slightly as you fold the letter. It's dangerous, yes, but it's also the only time you've felt alive in weeks. You hear footsteps. You slide the letter beneath a cushion and rise, smoothing your gown like nothing happened. A servant enters, eyes low. The king will not return tonight. You nod. You already knew. He's with his falconer, or his mistress, or his falconer's mistress. And now the ache sharpens. Because while your king dismisses you like a ceremonial belle, the man you wrote to, he waits. Somewhere out there in the cold stone maze of the castle, or riding through a forest, he reads your words and knows you exist. Not just as a queen, but as a woman. Sometimes the letters are never delivered. Too risky. You burn them in the fireplace. You watch the flames twist the ink into smoke and imagine the words drifting toward the stars. Maybe they'll be understood in another life. But more often, the letters reach their mark. And sometimes they return, folded in strange ways, marked with sigils or drops of wax shaped like half-moons. One line: I walk past the west corridor at dusk. That's all. And yet you hear the echo of your own heartbeat in the reply. It's all so fragile, and so bold. You hear the gestures in the hall, laughter echoing off the stone. You pretend to laugh too. You're the perfect queen, gracious, silent, devout. But the truth? You've written words that could end you, and still you keep writing. Because every queen knows, when swords are forbidden, letters become daggers. Here's your joke for tonight. What do you call a queen's love letter that starts a war? A well-punctuated mistake. You glance at the candle. The flame dances like a heartbeat. You lift the cushion and retrieve the letter. Just one more read before it's sent. You smile, and suddenly, in a life scripted by others, you feel like the author. You enter the kitchens, quietly, cautiously, like a queen with a purpose, not a craving. The air is thick with wood smoke, steam, and the slow perfume of roasted garlic and meat fat. Pots boil, knives clink, but none of it feels comforting tonight. You're not here for a midnight snack. You're here because someone said the word wormwood yesterday, casually, too casually, just a whisper at the edge of a courtyard conversation. And when you heard it, your blood went cold. Because wormwood is bitter, yes, but also fatal in the wrong hands. You've learned this over time. A queen's food is a gamble. Always has been. Beneath the glimmer of courtly banquets, those sugar-coated swans and gilded marzipan castles, is a very real fear that your next bite may be your last. You remember Queen Isabel of Bavaria, who insisted on eating only what her own maid prepared, and even then, sometimes only after her dog tasted it. She was mocked for it in songs, but she also lived longer than most of her rivals. So now you hover near the kitchens like a shadow. A curious inspection. A casual stroll. The head cook bows low. Too low. You smile tightly and note the patchy sweat on his brow. You ask what herbs they're using tonight. He lists them. Basil, sage, mint. You wait. No wormwood. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. You learned long ago that poison is the preferred weapon of the polite. Swords are loud. Scandals are messy. But a well-placed powder in a goblet? That's discreet. Tragic. Untraceable. Mainstream fact. Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, was famously associated with poisonings, whether fairly or not. She was so linked to the art of toxicity that her apothecaries were feared as much as her advisors. Her perfumed gloves were said to conceal lethal oils, though historians still argue whether this was misogyny or reality. And while you don't mix your own vials, yet you've heard stories. You know which wine turns cloudy when touched with arsenic. You've watched how powdered glass can be hidden in sweet custard. You once saw a pigeon die after pecking a discarded tart. But it isn't just assassination that stalks the royal kitchen. Sometimes it's punishment. Quirky tidbit. In one German duchy, a queen accused of infidelity was sentenced to eat only barley and water until she purified her womb. Whether she was guilty or not, she nearly starved. Food becomes political. Did you invite the wrong noble to dine? Did you offer the prized venison cut to a rival's son? Did your wine steward just pour from the wrong bottle? You begin to track patterns. Who enters the kitchen? Who leaves with covered trays? Who brings figs out of season? You learn to pretend you're complimenting the pie, when in truth you're watching your taster for signs of choking. That's another thing. The taster. Your shield. A loyal servant, yes, but also a walking reminder that trust is never total. You've had 3 tasters in 6 months. One died mysteriously. One fled. The current one doesn't make eye contact anymore. Just eats, swallows, and waits. You've considered fasting. Pretending at holiness. but that only leads to other dangers. A queen who doesn't eat becomes a queen who is sick. And a sick queen? Well, she might as well be a useless queen. So you take calculated bites. You sip slowly. You choose apples over stewed pears. The core can hide things. Pears are too soft, too easy to tamper with. And you offer dishes to others with a smile. You must try this, you say, watching closely as they chew. You find yourself leaning into your paranoia. Is that a new spice? Is that new made from your rival's province? Why was the platter changed last minute? Your sense of taste sharpens. So does your sense of betrayal. Here's your nightly jest. Why did the queen bring her own spoon to dinner? Because it never betrayed her. Eventually, you stop eating anything you didn't see prepared. You keep a stash of dried figs from your family's estate. You drink only boiled water steeped with rosemary you grew yourself in the window box. You claim it's a religious fast. Most believe you. Some admire your discipline. Others suspect. You once saw a duke go pale after sipping from his own cup, then glance at you. You smiled. You hadn't touched it. But he didn't know that. This is how it works now. Not with accusations, but with looks, with offered plates, with refusals disguised as preferences. You compliment the roast but only eat the bread. And slowly they begin to fear your food. Historians still debate whether certain queens were poisoners or merely rumored to be so. Queen Joanna I of Naples allegedly had rivals disappear after feasts. But records are murky, and most surviving chronicles were written by enemies. Was she lethal or just clever enough to let people believe she was? You understand that power now. Real fear doesn't come from screaming. It comes from seasoning. One final thought before bed. You can't taste trust, but you can feel it going stale. You return to your chambers. You leave the door ajar. You set your untouched platter beside the fire. You go to bed a little hungry, but alive. You wake to music. Not harps or lutes, nothing so soft. No, this music is subtler. The rustle of silk shifting in the hallway. The sharp click of shoes approaching too fast to be casual. And the creak of a door that's meant to stay closed. It's court music. Politics with a tempo. You sit up slowly, pulse already ahead of you. Because in this world, danger doesn't always arrive with swords drawn. It arrives in whispers, delivered on silver trays, served with a smile. By now, you've realized that court life is its own battlefield. One without banners, but filled with maneuvering generals. And queens? Queens must be grandmasters, not with armies, but with favors, glances, and well-timed silences. You rise and slip into a gown embroidered not for beauty, but for intent. Today's choice? Soft purple. Not royal enough to provoke, but noble enough to be remembered. Every thread you wear sends signals. Loyalty, wealth, restraint, strategy. Fashion here is language. Mispronounce it and you could start a war. Your morning audience begins. Courtiers bow and offer news, gifts, grievances. You nod, smile, ask a question that shows you were listening. But you're not. Not really. You're scanning. Who's sweating? Who's too quiet today? Who bowed just a shade too low? There's an art to this. You keep enemies closer, yes, but allies? They're the ones you watch. Because court alliances shift like smoke. One bad harvest, one lost betrothal, and yesterday's friend becomes tomorrow's regret. Take Queen Isabella of Castile. History remembers her as devout and iron-willed. But before she united Spain, she played a long, quiet game of alliances, feigned neutrality, and perfectly timed disapproval. She didn't raise her voice. She let others overstep, and then she owned the silence left behind. It's lunchtime. You sit at the high table. Nobles chatter below, watching you more than they eat. Every time you lift your goblet, it becomes an act of diplomacy. If you toast the wrong noble, you empower their faction. If you skip someone, they notice. Mainstream fact. In Eleanor of Aquitaine's time, the queen's seating chart at courtly feasts was so politically fraught, it required months of negotiation. A misplaced duke could cause a diplomatic incident. And historians still argue whether Eleanor deliberately sabotaged rivals through strategic dinner invitations. Back in your chamber, you debrief with your ladies. But not all of them are loyal. You know this. One of them repeats your offhand remarks to her cousin, a bishop. Another collects details about your spending habits. The third, your favorite, actually simply watches. That one's the most dangerous of all. Quirky tidbit. In a few Iberian courts, queens had shadow scribes. Scribes not to draft proclamations, but to document everything whispered in court. It was said Queen Violent of Hungary once blackmailed half her husband's court with quotes transcribed from their own wine-drenched boasts. The records, conveniently lost, or hidden, so you take your notes in your head, or not at all, because the most dangerous queens are the ones no one realizes are listening. Here's your joke. How do you know a queen just won a political argument? Her rival's castle suddenly has fewer guards. You stroll the gardens, purely for appearance. To those watching, you're enjoying flowers, maybe waiting on a painter or a noble suitor. But really, you're measuring footsteps, observing who follows whom. The chancellor's son is suddenly spending time with your chamberlain. Curious, you drop a comment, just a light one like a feather, into a conversation with a visiting duchess. I hear your cousin rides well. She replies carefully. She knows it isn't about horses. That's the other language of queens. Suggestion. You rarely say what you mean. You imply. You let people think they're clever for uncovering a truth you never confirmed. Sometimes you leak a false rumor, just a small one, like the queen may be unwell or the king favors his cousin's bride. You wait to see where it ends up. That's how you map betrayal, by following the echo. Historians still debate how much power queens really held. Were they puppets behind veils, or puppeteers with invisible strings? With queens like Elizabeth Woodville, no one agrees. She was either a seductress who corrupted the English court, or a survivor who navigated impossible odds. Possibly both. History, after all, is edited by survivors. You retire early today. Court wore its mask too tightly. You feel the strain of smiling, of phrasing everything twice, once aloud, once between the lines. But before sleep, you make one change. A quiet instruction to remove a minor noble from tomorrow's list. No explanation, no fuss. You sip your herbal tea. You let the rumor do the rest. Because power, in this palace, isn't the loudest voice. It's the whisper that never needs repeating. You lie still in the chill of morning, the sun just beginning to pierce through the stained glass slits of your chamber windows, coloring your ceiling with fragments of ruby and emerald light. But you don't notice. Your thoughts are already elsewhere, on the nursery down the corridor, and the ominous quiet surrounding it. Because today you must face the most perilous battlefield of all, the womb. In the medieval world, a queen's worth isn't measured by her kindness or wit. It's counted in heartbeats. Tiny, unborn heartbeats. You are, quite literally, a vessel for lineage. Your body is not your own. It's a dynasty's insurance policy. And if it fails to produce an heir, the fault never lies with the king. Even if he's 50, gout-ridden, and convinced bathing causes illness. No, it's always you, the queen. You dress carefully, not for vanity, for protection. A girdle blessed by a saint wraps beneath your gown. A charm meant to increase fertility. You've worn it for weeks. No luck. The monks say patience is godly. But patience here is political suicide. You remember Queen Anne of Denmark, who endured multiple miscarriages. Some said she was cursed. Others said she was being punished for marrying a Protestant. The real reason, likely medical complications no one understood. But back then, the court didn't want truth. It wanted bloodlines. You sip your herbal tonic, bitter and steaming. It smells like boiled moss and old hope. Your ladies assure you it's a trusted blend. Mugwort, raspberry leaf, and a few things better left unnamed. You drink anyway, not because you believe, but because they believe. And appearances matter. Midwives whisper behind your back. Chambermaids peek at your waistline. 1 month late, a flurry of excitement. 2 months, prayers. Then, disappointment. Again, you try to hide the pain, but your face betrays you. You're no longer just a queen. You're a barren queen, a word heavier than any crown. Historians still argue whether fertility rituals had any real impact. Some queens reportedly danced barefoot in sacred circles. Others bathed in milk or wore relics of miraculous mothers. One fringe record even claims a Bohemian queen rubbed her belly with eagle feathers, though that might have just been superstition smuggled into scripture. But here's what you know. Everyone around you becomes an expert. The bishop recommends fasting. Your mother writes insisting you eat more almonds. A noblewoman gifts you a fertility idol carved from oak, claiming it helped her deliver 4 sons. You later learn she actually adopted 2. And what of the king? First, he's attentive. He strokes your belly, speaks to it in jest, makes promises about names and inheritances. But as months turn into seasons, his visits grow shorter. His touch becomes polite. His glances veer elsewhere, to your cousin, to the court singer, to anyone not carrying the weight of expectation. You hear a whisper in the corridor. Perhaps the king will take a second wife. Stabs deeper than any dagger. Not because it's false, but because it's likely. You once read a scroll describing how Queen Blanche of Navarre wore white every day after her 5th miscarriage, refusing to speak. People called her mad, but you now understand her silence. It was the only sound she still controlled. Here's your nightly jest. Why don't queens play dice with their fertility? Because the stakes are always their heads. And yet, somehow you persist. You schedule your time meticulously. You only meet the king on auspicious nights, as the astrologer advises. You pray. You endure steaming poultices on your thighs. You carry charms sewn into your corset. You endure the thinly veiled gossip of court physicians who speculate about your humors in front of you like you're not even there. But it's not all passivity. You begin to study lineage, bloodlines. You understand which noble's children could pose a threat to your own, if your own ever arrive. You start building alliances with other women. The duchess whose 6th son just joined the church. The dowager who buried her last heir and now hoards influence like silver. You start preparing for war within the nursery. Quirky tidbit. In one French court, a queen was rumored to secretly switch her stillborn with a wet nurse's healthy boy. The baby grew up to become a famous noble. No one ever proved it, but no one dared question the queen's joy either. You keep a hand on your belly as you fall asleep, feeling nothing, yet hoping, always hoping, because for a queen, love doesn't secure your place. Loyalty doesn't. Even beauty fades. But a son? A son is the loudest scream in a silent war. The court smells different today. Not of roses or roasted meats, but of something quieter, shame, maybe, or fear. It lingers in the halls like forgotten perfume, clinging to tapestries and hushed voices. You know what it means. Queen has fallen. But not you. Not today. You glide past courtiers with that perfected expression. Serene, unreadable, ever so slightly amused. You've mastered this look. Equal parts grace and distance. Because if there's one lesson every queen learns early, it's this. No one falls quietly. Not when you wear a crown. You remember the first one you saw fall. A duchess, once beloved, now banished. She had smiled too boldly at the wrong ambassador. The king's cousin found her laugh offensive. That's all it took. One raised eyebrow, one missed curtsy, and suddenly, she was accused of conduct unbecoming. She left in a wagon with no escort, her jewels seized and her name erased from the court ledger. Mainstream fact. Agnes Sorel, the mistress of Charles VII of France, wasn't even a queen, but her influence was so strong that noble women copied her style. Until she died suddenly, aged just 28, under mysterious circumstances. Some say poison, others say politics. Historians still argue whether she was a victim of love or ambition, or both. Queens aren't immune. In fact, they're more exposed. You sit beneath painted saints and gold-leaf ceilings, listening as rumors swirl around a fellow queen. They say she's been spending time with her confessor, that she's neglecting her duties, that she's lost the confidence of the court. All euphemisms. Everyone knows what they mean. Disgrace has a vocabulary all its own. It never shouts. It simpers. You send a servant to deliver a gift to her. A silver comb. Innocuous. Elegant. But inside the box, tucked under velvet, a single message. They are watching. You know it won't save her. But you also know what it means to be seen, truly seen, by someone who's survived the edge of scandal. Quirky tidbit. Some queens were accused of treason for less than a glance. One English noblewoman, accused merely of being too cheerful with her male attendants, was exiled to a convent. Turns out, her laughter had interrupted a bishop's speech. You keep a list, not on paper, too risky, but in your mind, a mental ledger of names. Those who helped you rise, those who wouldn't flinch to see you fall, and those whose smiles grow just a little too wide when you're not looking. You once offered counsel to a young noblewoman at court. Trust no one who brings you wine without being asked. She laughed. You didn't. The king visits your chambers tonight. His eyes linger a little too long on the tapestry behind you. A gift from your father. A subtle reminder that you are not just a queen, but a daughter of another realm. A warning, perhaps, or a reassurance. Depends on the mood. He speaks in riddles. There are too many whispers lately. You nod, offer wine. You say nothing. Saying nothing is your second language now. He leaves unsatisfied. And you? You write. Not poetry this time. A list of allies, of debts, of escape routes if necessary. Because the fall of a queen isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it begins with an invitation you never receive. A meal you're not summoned to. A letter that stops arriving. Historians still debate how Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's fifth queen, truly fell. Was it reckless affection? Naivety? Or was she simply caught in a trap laid long before she ever entered the palace? Her enemies claimed she had unchaste behavior. The truth? Likely less damning than the politics that surrounded her. Here's tonight's jest. Why don't queens play hide and seek at court? Because when you're found, it usually ends with exile or worse. You walk the gardens alone. Not by choice. Your ladies were suddenly required elsewhere. You sit on a marble bench where another queen once wept. You can feel it in the stone. The cold doesn't bother you anymore, because you know the truth. You can wear a crown and still be one wrong sentence away from silence. But you also know this: disgrace isn't always the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a quieter kind of power. You light the candle yourself tonight, not because your servants are absent, but because sometimes it's better not to be seen. The shadows dance softly against the walls as you reach for the tiny velvet pouch in your drawer. Inside, not coins, not jewels, charms. A pressed flower tied with red thread, a sliver of bone, a ribbon with a knot so tight it might hold a prayer. Or a curse. You're not the only one. Every queen keeps something hidden, beneath the mattress, in the seams of a bodice, behind the altar cloth of the private chapel. Talismans, amulets, little superstitions that court priests would frown upon if they ever noticed, which they don't, or pretend not to, because sometimes piety and magic sleep in the same bed. You glance toward your wardrobe, not the one filled with gowns, but the smaller chest with your seasonal tokens. That's what you call them. One is a tiny carved figurine gifted by a woman from the northern provinces. She said it kept infants safe from spirits. You don't believe it, but you've never dared throw it away. Mainstream fact: Queen Joan of Navarre was accused of using witchcraft to try to kill King Henry V. She was imprisoned in 1419, not for actual spells, but likely for the influence she wielded and the fear it bred. Historians still argue whether she ever practiced anything beyond court strategy. But the accusation alone was enough to lock her away for years. And so, you're careful. You wear your cross, of course. You attend Massachusetts. You kneel. But inside your bodice, tucked close to your skin, is a sprig of dried rue, hidden in lace. It smells like bitter herbs and old wives' tales. Your chambermaid once claimed to dream the future. You laughed. Then she warned you to avoid the west corridor on the full moon. That very night, a tapestry caught fire from a candle, nearly taking a guard with it. You didn't laugh after that. The other ladies whisper, too, not just of politics, but of omens. A dream of falling teeth? A sign someone close will betray you. An owl at the window? A death in the family. And if a mirror cracks in the queen's chambers, you may as well start packing. Quirky tidbit. Some queens commissioned protective garments. Undergarments stitched with symbols meant to ward off evil spirits. One Scandinavian monarch allegedly had a chemise embroidered with runes that promised fertility, loyalty, and victory in battle. And that's just what the servants saw. You've heard of women at court who visit healers deep in the woods. Not midwives, not priests. Women with knowledge too old for scrolls and too feared for church. You've never gone, but you know who has. You once caught the scent of burnt fennel and sulfur on a lady-in-waiting's fingers. She claimed she'd been tending the kitchens. But no kitchen in the castle smells like that. And the king? He pretends not to notice. Or perhaps he truly doesn't. Kings don't worry about magic. Kings have steel. But queens? Queens have whispers and herbs and women with secrets buried under their fingernails. Sometimes you place pins in the shape of a cross on your pillow before sleep. Sometimes you braid your hair in a circle like a ward. You tell yourself it's nothing. But your mother did the same. And her mother before her. Because for all the prayers and ceremonies and courtly rituals, no one truly trusts the saints to keep them safe anymore. Historians still debate whether magic in the medieval courts was superstition or subtle resistance. Was it real? Was it performance? Or was it simply the only power women could practice without a sword?
To niktes jest.
Why don't queens burn their old charms? Because sometimes the fear of magic is more powerful than the magic itself. You sit by the hearth, running your fingers over the pouch again. You consider throwing it into the fire, proving to yourself you've outgrown the fear. But the flames snap louder. The shadows stretch just a little too far. And you tuck it back into the drawer. You rise. You blow out the candle. Darkness returns like an old friend. After all, what's more medieval than a queen with a crown in one hand and a spell in the other? The marriage contract arrived tied with blue ribbon. Pure silk, foreign-made, smelling faintly of lavender and old paper. You watched as the ambassador held it out with trembling hands, bowing low, knowing this scroll contained not just an alliance, but a woman. You, or someone like you, a foreign bride. She arrives next week. A princess from across the sea. Barely 16 if the rumors are true, and already whispered about in 3 languages. Sharp as a needle, some say. Spoiled, others mutter. Too pretty for her own good. You smile politely when they speak of her, but inside you're calculating. Because queens know, foreign brides are never just brides. They come bearing gold, an army of etiquette, and sometimes dangerous ambition. You remember when you were the new queen, eyes all over you, every mistake magnified, every misstep interpreted as treason or idiocy. You stammered in the wrong language once and were accused of insulting the bishop. Took weeks to recover from that dinner. Mainstream fact. And of Cleves arrived in England barely speaking the language, and after one disastrous meeting with Henry VIII, where he found her not attractive enough, was promptly divorced. Historians still argue whether she was politically naive or played her cards so well that she ended up wealthy, safe, and far from Henry's executioner's block. Honestly, could go either way. So you watch. You've read her dowry list. Furs, books, a dozen Arabian horses, an unmatched diamond the size of a small egg, the envoy said. But what you heard was, this girl is coming to compete. Because once she sets foot in this palace, she isn't just marrying the prince. She's entering the court's silent war. Her accent will be mocked, her food rejected, and if she's clever, she'll smile through all of it. While quietly building a fortress of allies behind her pretty little fan. She'll bring her own customs, of course. Foreign gowns, foreign manners. Perhaps she'll nod instead of bow. Perhaps she'll fast on the wrong days. And when she does, someone will claim she's disrespecting God. You plan your first meeting with her. Not officially, no. Queens don't welcome. Queens observe. You'll arrive late, dressed subtly. Watch her curtsy, too low or too stiff, either way revealing more than she intends. Then you'll offer something small. a ring from your own finger, or a handkerchief embroidered with your initials. A symbol, a test. Will she return the gesture? Will she ask about the court? Will she look you in the eyes? That's how you'll know what kind of queen she's going to be. Quirky tidbit. In some Eastern courts, new queens brought their own astrologers and midwives, men and women with strange accents and stranger rituals. Some courts banned these attendants within a month. Others let them stay, until the local clergy began complaining of foreign enchantments. You once heard of a queen from Aragon who secretly funded rebel groups in her home country through hidden shipments of linen. They never found the proof, but her ships were always too heavily guarded for simple laundry. Historians still debate how much autonomy foreign queens truly had. Some were adored. Others were treated like fine furniture, expensive, unmoving, and best kept in one corner. Queen Marie Antoinette, centuries later, would become the perfect scapegoat. Foreign, frivolous, and female. You see it clearly now. This new queen will have two paths: assimilation or defiance. Blend into the court like cream into tea, or stay distinct and risk being skimmed off entirely. You won't interfere. Not directly. That would be undignified. But you might offer her a few names to avoid. A lady with sticky fingers. A priest who listens too closely. A tailor who reports back to the chancellor. Not kindness, just insurance. Because if she stumbles, and she will stumble, you want her falling away from you. Here's your nightly jest. Why did the new queen bring 10 trunks but no map? Because she knew where she was going, just not what she was walking into. Later, in your chamber, you practice phrases in her language. Not many, just enough to make her feel watched. Just enough to make her feel not alone, in a way that's both comforting and terrifying. You've learned to be generous in appearance, sharp in strategy, and quiet in intent. She'll learn that too, eventually, and until she does, you'll be waiting, with tea and a smile. You awaken to the rumble of distant hooves, dozens of them. The tremor runs up through the stone floor like thunder. The war banners have arrived. The castle shifts when war approaches. It doesn't shout. It hums. Guards pace faster. Courtiers huddle closer. Everyone whispers in a lower register, as if loud voices might spark a battlefield outside the walls. And you rise slower today. You don't run from war anymore. You prepare for it. A queen in wartime walks a different line. Your gowns grow darker, your jewels smaller. Not because of grief, because of optics. Lavish displays during conflict invite resentment. You begin dressing like a widow before your husband even leaves, just in case. Mainstream fact: Margaret of Anjou, wife of Henry VI, didn't wait for kings to defend her. During the Wars of the Roses, she raised armies herself, led them, fought for her son's inheritance. She wasn't loved. She wasn't forgiven. But she was feared. You know that story well. The king is assembling his council. The maps are out. The Latin is flying. And you, queen, consort, figurehead, are conveniently uninvited. They say it's to protect your sensibilities. You nod and smile. And then you send your steward to the stables with a message for the captain of the guard. Because queens aren't generals. But they are excellent messengers. A whispered suggestion here, a question posed at supper. Why was the northern flank left unguarded last season? And suddenly the war plan adjusts. They'll never credit you, of course. That's fine. Victory rarely requires a signature. You walk past a room where the king lectures his knights. His voice is raised. Yours never is. But when you pause in the hallway, the guards fall silent. That's enough. You once sent a letter to a distant cousin, an influential lord who sat on the fence between two armies. You offered nothing more than a phrase. I would hate to see your sons suffer for your silence. He responded the next day. His troops arrived the day after. Historians still argue whether queens actually influenced wartime policy or merely embroidered banners while the men fought. But letters like yours, they keep surfacing. Quiet threats in cursive. You know this too, war isn't just fought with swords. It's fought with food, morale, rumors. One wrongly timed panic in the market can derail an entire military campaign. So you host a feast, just a small one, enough to show the city that the queen still eats, that the castle still laughs. Quirky tidbit. Some queens wore armor, not into battle but during palace inspections. Queen Maria Theresa of Austria was said to don a breastplate beneath her ceremonial robes when inspecting troops. No one dared question whether it was symbolic or functional. You visit the barracks. You bless the soldiers. You clasp a few hands. A young one trembles when you touch him, says it's like being touched by an angel. You don't correct him, because on the battlefield, belief is stronger than iron. At night, you read the names of the dead aloud to yourself. Quietly, no one hears, but you do. You remember them, not because it's your duty, but because someday, someone will whisper your name into a candlelit chamber, and you'll want them to feel it meant something. Your jest for the evening. What's the difference between a queen and a general? The queen gets blamed when the war goes badly, and forgotten when it goes well. One evening, the king asks you what you think. Truly, it's the first time in weeks. You say, war ends, but the memory of how it began never does. Be careful who gets credit. Be more careful who gets blamed. He stares. Then he nods. Just once. That night, a new advisor is quietly dismissed. Another arrives by morning, your cousin's cousin. Just a coincidence, of course. You write another letter. Not to a noble this time. To a woman. A dowager duchess in the western provinces. Well known for her political instincts and her sprawling estate along a crucial supply route. You invite her to tea. That's all. And if tea becomes diplomacy, well, queens are very good at pouring. The war is far from over. It may not even have begun. But in the quiet hours, behind the map-strewn war rooms and beneath the helmeted bravado, you're already positioning your pieces. Because queens don't charge. They surround. You pull the drapes closed with deliberate grace, the final sliver of afternoon sun retreating like a guilty whisper. The room is lit now only by the low glow of firelight and candle. Perfect for what comes next. Tonight, the battlefield is the bedroom.
Forget romance.
Forget love. In this world, the bed is not a sanctuary. It is a chessboard, and the queen is always playing for position. You recline not because you are resting, but because reclining gently, deliberately, tells a story. One of invitation, perhaps, or reluctance. Depends on who's watching. The king enters. You don't rise. You let him cross the room first. Let him initiate the words, the gestures, the mood. It's theater after all. Power performed in soft linens and hushed tones. And you've mastered your part. Mainstream fact. Queen Elizabeth of York was said to have soothed King Henry VII after each day of rule, her presence calming his notorious suspicion. Some scholars argue that their union began as strategy and grew into affection. But even then, the bedroom remained political. Every touch bore the weight of dynasty. You've seen how desire sways decisions. A kiss at the right time, a whisper between sheets. Suddenly, the appointment of a cousin, the pardon of a friend, the signing of a suspicious treaty. These are easier, gentler asks when made during disheveled twilight, when the king's armor lies in a pile near the door and his thoughts are hazy with heat. You've learned what voice to use, which breath to release, where to hesitate, where to lean in. This isn't seduction. This is diplomacy in silk. But here's the catch. While you play this game, so do others. The singer with clever eyes. The lady-in-waiting who lingers too long when pouring wine. Even the huntsman who brings fresh venison too often. They're not just serving the crown. They're seeking access, and sometimes, they find it in the shadows of your bedchamber. Quirky tidbit. One Italian queen was rumored to have trained her maids to intervene when her husband's attention strayed too far. They were instructed to trip, spill, or fake illness, anything to break a moment before it became intimate. The tactic? Surprisingly effective. You've walked in on the wrong conversation, heard the wrong laugh from the wrong mouth, and now you know the truth. Infidelity is less painful than irrelevance. So you adapt. You start choosing your own moments. You let the king believe your touch is scarce because of religious observance, or headaches, or cycles of the moon. You withhold carefully, then give suddenly. He mistakes this for desire. You know it's leverage. You introduce incense into the chamber. To help sleep, you claim. But the scent lingers in fabrics and minds, and soon, he doesn't sleep as well in any other room. Historians still debate whether queens used physical intimacy to influence national policy. But in the private hours, behind drawn curtains, power is exchanged more quietly than any treaty signed by candlelight. You discover things, too. Secrets are most often spoken not in council chambers, but in the haze just before sleep, when tongues loosen and masks slip. He once told you which noble he didn't trust. You remembered. He once told you he doubted the bishop's loyalty. You filed it away. He once murmured the name of another woman. You did not forget. Here's your nightly jest. What's the difference between a queen's bed and a confessional? One receives sins. The other remembers them. And sometimes the bed becomes a throne. There are nights when the king is weak, sick, or defeated. You hold his hand. You murmur stories or lines of old poems. You brush hair from his brow and remind him of victories past. You are not the healer, but you are the restoration. You control the temperature of the air between you, the pacing of intimacy, the rhythm of suggestion. And when it suits you, you step away, leave a kiss on his temple and nothing more. Let him chase. Let him need. It is in this tension that queens become irreplaceable. Not loved, perhaps, but necessary, and that, in a palace crawling with contenders, is the truest safety of all. You stare through the slit of your chamber window, watching the clouds turn from silver to iron. Rain is coming again. A long, cold rain, the kind that seeps through stone and bone and memory. It suits your mood, because today you're not allowed to walk the corridors. You're not permitted to attend mass with the others. Today you are confined. No, not officially. There was no decree, no guards posted outside your door. But the message was clear. It would be best if Her Majesty remained in her apartments, which, in court language, means stay invisible. You've seen this tactic before. It's the silent cage.
No acquiescescens. No confrontascen.
Just omission. Invitations stop. Advisors stop calling. The king's visits taper into nothing. It begins gently, for your rest, they say, for your peace. But you're not a child, and you're certainly not resting. You're being erased. Mainstream fact: Queen Ingeborg of Denmark was locked away by her husband, King Philip II of France, after their wedding night. No reason was ever formally stated. She remained confined, largely silent and unseen, for decades. Her only crime likely being that she wasn't politically useful enough. And now it's your turn to sit, quietly, in your painted cage. But here's the thing about queens. We don't vanish. You begin again differently. You write letters, not to the king but to his mother. A note thanking her for her steadfastness in faith. A reference to that saint she honors. A quiet reminder that you, too, are devoted. Harmless. Worth preserving. You take up embroidery again. You stitch your own family's crest into altar cloths and send them to nearby abbeys. Acts of devotion on the surface. But beneath the thread is the message. I am still here. I still matter. Quirky tidbit. Some queens left marks, literally, on castle walls when confined. Scratched names, dates, drawings. One Bohemian queen carved a single phrase into the window frame of her tower room. I remember when I was loved. You leave no marks. Your weapon is memory. You start asking your ladies questions. About the town. The bishop's sermons. The new guards in the northern wing. They think you're curious. They don't realize you're rebuilding your network. You remember every servant who still bows properly. Every maid who lingers to offer extra warmth. You take note of who delivers cold food too often, and who removes your letters with averted eyes. Because when the world starts to shrink, you learn who stays inside the walls with you, and who closes the gate. Historians still debate whether these confinements were punishments, protective gestures, or quiet nudges toward retirement. But queens know, they were always warnings. You dream more now, not of freedom but of clarity. The kind of quiet where thoughts no longer shout over each other. You begin to notice things, the rhythm of footfalls in the hallway, The way wax pools differently depending on who lights your candles. You begin to write. Not letters. Records. Every whisper you remember. Every slight. Every kindness. A ledger of behavior. Because someday the world will shift again. And when the door opens, you'll know exactly who to trust and who to destroy. Here's your nightly jest. What's a confined queen's favorite pastime? Remembering everything everyone wants her to forget. They send a priest. He blesses your chambers, offers scripture, talks of virtue in waiting. You smile, quote a passage about lions and dens, and ask if he's ever been locked in one. He doesn't return. You start receiving books again. Not many. Religious texts mostly, but one contains a pressed flower between its pages. A violet. Not native. Sent from someone far. Someone still loyal. And so you wait. Not idly. Not gently. You wait like a blade cooling in its sheath. Because queens may be caged, but they are never truly tamed. And confinement? Confinement teaches you to become invisible in plain sight. You sit before a mirror that doesn't love you anymore. Once it sang your name in sunlight, reflected youth, power, approval. But now it stares back coldly, showing someone they whisper about more than they greet. A queen with clouded eyes and a too-quiet court. But you're not mad. Not yet. It begins, as most undoings do, with suggestion. A look that lingers too long on your silence. A physician who wonders aloud if you've been resting enough. A lady-in-waiting who gently moves your cup away, as though you've forgotten where to place it. They never say it directly. They never need to. The notion of madness is a slow leak, not a flood. It seeps in through locked doors and unspoken fears. You cough once in council, just a tickle, and someone suggests you retire early. The next day, your seat is filled by the king's niece. Just for this session, they say. Then your letters are delayed. Your requests, forgotten. And somewhere in the background, someone begins composing a new version of your story. Mainstream fact: Queen Juana of Castile, better known by the nickname La Loca, was locked away for decades, her mental state debated endlessly. Historians still argue whether she was truly unwell or merely inconvenient. Some believe her madness was exaggerated, if not invented, by those eager to control her throne. You watch your own image and whisper, "Not me, not yet." And yet you begin to wonder. You forget things, small things, where you put your hairpins, the name of a servant who's been with you for years. You hear echoes in your chamber long after the footsteps have stopped. You convince yourself it's the stone, the cold, the loneliness. But sometimes, in the hush of twilight, you feel watched. You test them. You say strange things at supper, half-truths wrapped in riddles, just to see who blinks, who reports, who leans in closer to study your eyes. It becomes a game, one you must win. Quirky tidbit. Some queens employed personal fools, not just for amusement, but as secret confidants. One French queen had hers trained to repeat any phrase he overheard in her presence. Backwards. If the wrong words returned, she'd know who to fear. You begin walking the halls at odd hours. You claim insomnia. Really, you're checking which guards pretend not to see you, which doors stay locked. You find a letter, unsigned, unsealed, slipped beneath a tapestry. Just 5 words. He thinks you're not well. You know who he is, and you know what happens next. So you prepare. You begin speaking more softly, more slowly. You eat carefully. You bless everyone. You wear only white. You become the portrait of peace. And it terrifies them. Historians debate whether queens feigned madness to survive, whether they masked ambition with docility. But you're living proof of a third way. Not mad, not meek, aware. Here's tonight's jest. What do you call a queen who whispers to herself? Dangerous. If she knows who's listening. You meet the king. Alone. You ask to hold his hand. You tell him you've had dreams. Of peace. Of legacy. You name your enemies, but gently, like observations, not accusations. You mention the niece, the bishop, the steward. You smile. You apologize for wandering thoughts. And you watch his eyes. He's listening. He's unsure. You press your lips to his hand and say, "If I am ever unwell, I trust you to protect me." You've given him the illusion of control. That's all he ever wanted. That night, you burn a single page from your diary. The one where you questioned your memory. You won't need it anymore. You aren't losing your mind. You're controlling the narrative. And the difference? That's the line between a madwoman in a tower and a queen no one dares remove. The bells toll softly through the mist. You stand alone in the royal chapel, light slanting in through stained glass saints with cracked halos. Somewhere beneath your feet lie generations of kings, and a few queens, if they were lucky enough to earn burial under stone rather than rumors. Today, another queen is laid to rest. Not you, not yet, but her name is already fading from the lips of courtiers. They speak of her now the way one mentions a withered flower. She was lovely once. Pitiful at the end. I always pitied her, really. And the truth? No one actually knows how she died. You watched her fade. Slowly, publicly, then quietly. At first, the queen with the laugh that filled gardens. Then, the one whose eyes wandered too long in chapel. Then, the one who took ill. Then silence. Then candles. You attend the funeral, of course. You must. You wear black trimmed with gold. Not too somber. Not too celebratory. You place a hand over your heart during the prayers. You mouth the words. You bow your head. But inside, you listen, because the dead don't speak. But the living can't stop talking. Mainstream fact. Queen Catherine Howard's execution was swift, but her reputation lingered in the tower like perfume. After her death, rumors spread about ghosts, confessions, and hidden letters. Historians still argue whether she was guilty of the crimes that condemned her, or simply caught in someone else's net. As the prayers end, you notice the priest avoid your gaze. You recognize that look. It's the same one they used on her. The same faint fear behind the reverence. You're next. We're close enough. And yet, queens never stay buried. Not really. There are stories, about queens who came back. Not physically, but in ink, in whispers, in children who bore their names and enemies who cursed them for decades after. You've even read a few of their letters, found in dusty boxes hidden in castle walls. Some were love notes, some were warnings. One was a list of names, every person who had ever lied to her. You added your own name to that list in pencil, because sometimes survival is a betrayal. Quirky tidbit. In the Polish court, a queen was once buried with her favorite book of spells, clasped in her hands like a Bible. The monks buried her anyway. 50 years later, during repairs, the tomb was found disturbed. The book was gone. You walk the hall of portraits after the service. Queens stare down from gilded frames. So many faces, so many fates. Some serene, some smiling. One with eyes so sharp you feel them cut as you pass. And none of them ever get to speak for themselves. Not in life. Certainly not in death. You consider that as you approach your chamber. You sit at your desk. You begin to write. Not a letter, not a diary. A record. Not of events, but of truths. What you saw. What you know. What others hope you forget. You lock it in a box and hide it beneath a loose floor tile. You wonder if someone will find it one day, perhaps centuries from now, when your name has long turned into legend or cautionary tale. Historians still debate whether certain queens ever even existed, whether names etched into stone were women of flesh and bone, or convenient fiction. Maybe that's the final indignity, to be doubted even in your bones. Here's your jest. What's the one thing a queen can't take with her to the grave? Her version of the story. But tonight you write anyway, because maybe, just maybe, your truth will outlast the myths. You end your page with one line, pressed firmly, deeply into the paper. I was here. And that, you think, might be enough. The halls are quieter now. The walls, which once echoed with fanfare and plodding and silk-on-stone footsteps, have grown still. You walk them slowly, deliberately, each step heavier than the last. Not from fear, not from age, but from knowing too much. There's no coronation today, no feast, no summons. Only you, and the crown you no longer need to wear to remind them you are queen. Because now, your power doesn't shimmer in candlelight or glitter on velvet. It hums low, unseen, patient. The kind that makes people look twice when you smile. The kind that turns silence into strategy. They thought they could break you, with exile, with whispers, with empty chairs and closed doors. But here you are, still, and not just surviving settled. Because this, finally, is your kingdom. Not the one in maps and scrolls, but the one behind the scenes. The nod that sends a steward running. The brief touch that halts a war. The look that unseats a favorite before breakfast. Mainstream fact. Queen Melisende of Jerusalem was a ruler in name and in truth. Sidelined at first, then underestimated until she outmaneuvered even her own son. Her regency became a reign, and her reign became a legend. Historians still argue whether she ruled from behind the curtain, or if the curtain simply couldn't contain her. You understand that story now. You no longer enter courtrooms, you summon them. You no longer chase alliances. You are the gravity that alliances orbit. And yet, your fingers still tremble some mornings. Muscle memory from years of caution, of danger, of waiting for the drop that never came, or almost did. You wear your oldest gown today. The one they said was unfashionable. The one with the stitched lilies from your mother's household. You wear it like armor, because it's time. Time to walk the corridors not with dread, but with remembrance. Time to step into the great hall, not as a wife or a mother or a threat, but as a woman who endured every role and outlived them all. You pass portraits again. Familiar eyes meet yours, some pitying, some proud. One, a young face with a stubborn chin, looks like someone you used to be. You nod at her. She doesn't smile. And then, in the stillness, a courier arrives. He brings a scroll, a seal you recognize, a summons. The council wants your opinion, not as a courtesy, as a necessity. You sit. You read. You write a reply with ink the same shade as the bloodline they once feared wouldn't continue. You seal it with your ring, not the king's, and send it back without fanfare. They'll read it in silence. They'll pretend they thought of the idea themselves. And you'll light a candle, the same one you lit the night you first questioned your worth. It flickers just slightly, then steadies, just like you. Quirky tidbit. In one forgotten court, a queen was never officially crowned. She ruled behind veils, through letters, through tea and ceremony and mourning and miracles. They only realized what she'd done after her death, when every major family owed her a debt. Her tombstone read simply, "She kept the house standing." You lie in bed, fingers resting lightly on your stomach. Soft now. The court gossips about your age, your retreat, your reduced relevance. You let them, because even the gossip needs something to cling to. And you've let go of the need to be seen. Here's your last jest. What's the hardest thing about being a queen? Learning when not to remind them. You close your eyes, and the stories, the rumors, the portraits, the versions of you, all fade into the warmth of your own breath. You are still here, still writing, still reigning. And now, let the weight of these stories dissolve softly into the night. Close your eyes and return to the quiet chamber, the one with the stone walls and flickering hearth, where queens once whispered prayers no one else would hear. Feel the velvet of history brushing gently at your shoulders, not as burden, but as comfort. Because even though their names have faded from banners, and their bones now rest beneath cold stone slabs, their stories hum through time, not in the grand tales that fill history books, but in the spaces between, in the glances not recorded, in the choices made behind closed doors, in the slow, steady survival of women who were never truly meant to survive. Let the firelight dim behind your eyelids. Let the chambers go quiet. No more duties, no more plotting. No more poisons or plots or pleasantries to manage. Just the hush of memory, the rise and fall of your breath, the settling of dust, like tiny crowns floating gently to the floor. Tonight, you're not a queen at war. You're not a ghost haunting a forgotten corridor. You're simply a soul in the hush of history. Rest now. No more need to hold the world together. It's time to let it go. You've done enough.